Okay, so you're thinking about diving into the world of logo design. You want a logo that really represents your brand, right? That perfect visual handshake that says, this is who we are.
It's a really common goal, and a lot of people I talk to, they just want to jump right into the visuals.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many hours I've spent on Pinterest just like pinning logos that I love.
Nothing wrong with that. But it's important to remember that a good logo, it's built on a solid foundation.
Mhm.
Like, you wouldn't build a house starting with the paint color, would you? You need that blueprint first.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So we need to pump the brakes on the visual inspiration for a minute and dig a little deeper first.
Exactly. This is where really understanding your brand comes in, and I mean really understanding it inside and out.
So more than just like what your favorite color is.
Way more. Think about your brand story. Why does it exist? What are its core values? Its personality? Is it playful and approachable, or is it more classic, maybe luxurious? Who are you trying to connect with?
Okay, so let's say my brand is all about sustainability, ethical sourcing. I'd want to make sure those values are like woven into the logo somehow.
Absolutely. Now imagine like you're translating those values into a physical space. So a customer walks into a store designed like that logo. What's the vibe? What do they feel?
Ooh, okay, that's a cool way to think about it. Suddenly I'm imagining like lots of natural light, reclaimed wood, maybe some plants, it's like those values are coming to life.
You got it. And that brings us to the next crucial step, which is communicating all of this to your designer.
Right, because they can't read our minds yet. So how do we make sure we're speaking the same language?
The brand brief.
Yep.
Think of like that blueprint we were talking about, but specifically for your logo.
So it's like we're taking all those brand ingredients we talked about, the values, the story, the target audience, and putting it all into a recipe for the designer to follow.
Precisely. And just like a recipe, a good brand brief needs specific ingredients. So you'll want to outline your brand story, who your target audience is, who your competitors are, the overall style and feeling you're going for.
Don't forget visual inspiration. So I'm thinking back to those Pinterest boards. Is it helpful to show what we don't like as well?
It's actually more helpful than you might think. Showing what you dislike is just as crucial as showing what you love. It helps the designer understand kind of like your aesthetic boundaries. Think of it like this. If you tell your designer you want a cake, but you hate fondant, they're not going to waste time showing you designs covered in it.
I love cake, and I definitely get that analogy. So we've got our brand figured out, our brand brief is prepped, and we're ready to connect with the designer. What do we need to keep in mind when we're actually talking to them?
So when you first connect with a designer, be open, be specific, share that awesome brand brief that you've put together, and don't be afraid to really get into the why behind your choices.
So not just, I like blue, but more like blue represents trustworthiness and stability, which are key values for my brand.
That's a great example. That deeper explanation gives your designers so much more to work with. They can really take that and translate those values into design elements that really capture the essence of your brand.
It's like giving them a peek inside your brand's soul instead of just pointing at a color swatch.
Exactly. But remember, while it's important to be clear, give direction. Also remember that designers are creatives, right?
Yeah.
So give them some space to work their magic.
Right. It's a partnership, not a dictatorship.
Right.
We're providing the blueprint, the ingredients, but we trust them to bring their own creativity to the table.
I love that analogy. A good designer is going to take your brief and translate it into something unique, memorable, that you might not have even imagined yourself.
That's where the magic happens. And speaking of magic, the designer comes back with a first draft of the logo. What happens next? How do we give good feedback without, crushing their creative spirit?
That's such an important point, right? Giving feedback can feel a little tricky, but it's also where the logo really starts to come to life. And again, it all comes back to clear communication. So instead of just saying I like it or I don't like it, get specific.
Okay, so instead of, I don't like this font, I might say, this font feels a bit too modern for my brand, which is more classic and elegant. Could we explore some serif fonts that evoke a sense of history and tradition?
Now you're talking. That kind of feedback is pure gold for a designer because it tells them exactly what's working, what's not, and why, and it gives them such clear direction for revisions. Remember, you're not aiming for I like it. You're aiming for this is perfect because.
And this back and forth, this feedback loop, it can even spark new ideas, right? Maybe we stumble upon a design element we didn't even realize we loved.
Absolutely. This collaborative back and forth can actually help you refine your brand identity even further. It's like holding up a mirror to your brand and discovering these hidden gems that you might not have even noticed before.
So the logo design process, it becomes a branding exercise in itself. I love that.
It's true. And that's why finding a designer who's also a good communicator, a good listener, is key. They shouldn't just be like taking orders. They should be asking questions, maybe even challenging your assumptions in a constructive way.
It's about finding a design partner who's invested in helping you tell your brand's story in the most impactful way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, I know some people, they might feel a little nervous about giving feedback, especially if they don't consider themselves, a creative. What advice would you give to someone who's a little hesitant to speak up?
Oh, I've totally been there. It's easy to feel like you don't want to offend anyone, especially when it comes to something as personal as someone's creative work. But here's the thing. Designers are professionals. They understand that feedback is a crucial part of the process, and they welcome it, even if it's not all, sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. And remember, you are not stuck with the first draft. The beauty of this process is that it's iterative. You go back and forth, you refine the design until it truly captures the essence of your brand.
So to recap, the key to effectively communicating your brand vision to a logo designer is to know your brand inside and out. Create that detailed brand brief, communicate openly and specifically with your designer, and don't be afraid to give and receive feedback throughout the process.
Absolutely. And remember, the more effort you put into communicating your vision, the better the end result will be. And the more likely you are to end up with a logo that truly represents your brand and resonates with your target audience.
It's like building that house we talked about earlier, right? You wouldn't want to live in a house that's built on shaky foundations.
Certainly not. A strong foundation is key, whether we're talking about houses or logos. And speaking of foundations, I think we've laid a pretty solid one for understanding the importance of communication in logo design.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from like the nitty-gritty of brand briefs to brainstorming these sensory experiences that bring a brand to life.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Remember, a logo is just the starting point. It's up to you to build a brand that people can really connect with on every level.
And for anyone listening who's ready to take their brand to the next level, remember, clear communication is key. Talk to your designer, be open to feedback, and don't be afraid to think outside the box.
Embrace those what-if questions. You never know what amazing brand experiences you might create.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those creative sparks flying. So we've talked a lot about how a logo should represent your brand's values, personality, but what if we could actually, experience those things with more than just our eyes?
Now you're speaking my language. It's funny how often we limit branding to just the visual, right? But think about it. When you walk into your favorite coffee shop, it's not just the logo that tells you you're in the right place.
Totally. It's the smell of the coffee, the sound of the espresso machine, the whole atmosphere. It's a feeling.
Exactly. It's all those sensory elements working together to create that connection with the brand. So why stop at the logo? Imagine if we took those same principles and used them to create a truly immersive brand experience.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Give me an example.
Let's go back to your sustainable brand, right? Imagine walking into their store, and instead of just like a generic fresh linen scent, what if it was something that really evokes nature? Maybe cedarwood, sandalwood, a hint of like fresh earth after a rain shower.
Ooh, I can practically smell it now.
So relaxing, right? And the music. Instead of something generic, it's soothing, acoustic, maybe even some nature sounds mixed in. And imagine, the displays are crafted from reclaimed wood. There's natural light pouring in.
It's like stepping inside that Pinterest board we were talking about earlier, but with all five senses engaged.
Exactly. It's about creating a holistic experience that goes beyond just the visual. And it's not just limited to physical spaces either. Think about how you can translate these same elements into your online presence, your packaging, even your customer service interactions.
Wow, you've given me a lot to think about. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We went from the very practical stuff, like creating a brand brief, all the way to brainstorming these full-on sensory experiences.
It's been great exploring all of this with you. And remember, the logo, it's really just the beginning, right? It's up to you to build a brand that people can really connect with on every single level.
And for anyone listening who's feeling ready to take their brand to the next level, remember what we talked about. Communication is key. Talk to your designer, be open to feedback, and don't be afraid to get a little creative. Think outside that box.
Embrace those what-if questions. You never know what amazing brand experiences you might create.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those creative sparks flying.